everyone, and welcome to the ISM New Jersey Voice of Supply Chain series, sponsored by the Real Sourcing Network. Thank you so much to the president of Real Sourcing Network, Sarah Scudder. I'm really excited to be your guest host today. My name is Lisa Trinh, and I am an e-commerce procurement category manager at GSK, and also a contributor of ISM New Jersey. So today we will be talking to Sheri Hinish, who many of you may know on LinkedIn and other social platforms as the supply chain queen. Sheri is also an IBF Global Partner championing sustainable supply chain, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And she also has her own podcast called The Supply Chain Revolution. So honestly, Sheri, I don't know how you do it all. But I will stop here and I'll let Sheri introduce herself to you. So, Sheri, can you introduce yourself to the audience and what drawn you to the supply chain profession?
Sure. So thank you, Lisa. Oh, there's some feedback. Can you hear me all right? There's some feedback.
I can hear you.
Awesome. Well, I'm super excited to join today. Lisa, I know you from Rutgers, and we did a Supply Chain Rebel Spotlight a few months back. So super cool to join ISM New Jersey today. My name's Sheri Hinish, like she said, also called the nickname Supply Chain Queen, that's grown into this brand, what I like to call new school supply chain. And I have a very non-traditional career path. So growing up, I didn't know anyone in supply chain. It wasn't a career choice or even part of my plan. I'd actually like to say that I sort of found supply chain on a journey, and it was more of a series of things that didn't really pan out. And looking back, it was the curiosity that fueled a career change for me in supply chain. I had a boss who changed from IT to supply chain, and I raised my hand. So I was curious and I took a risk to try something new. And what's interesting looking back is it was that one decision that changed the entire course of my life. So I'm drawn to supply chain because I feel that supply chains have the power to change the world. And so much change happens in the supply chain. If we want to address some of the world's really complex problems, like the business model emergency, which is largely extractive, linear, broken, and it leaves a lot of folks behind. So, when I think about what's my North Star, I love sustainable supply chain. I want this to be a career path for everyone, like my daughter, Ariana. And I hope that a lot of folks who feel underrepresented, that they won't have to endure some of those barriers that many women in our field have faced.
Great, thank you for that, Sheri. And I think you kind of touched on that point lightly there, but to expand a bit further, so what excites you the most about your work, and what inspires you to get up every morning?
Sure. So, I think now it's impact, and, I want to build a better world for my children and other people's children and their children. And what's interesting is that you reach a point in your life where you say, how is what I'm doing making a difference? And for me, I decided to stop living around my job. And I wanted my personal values and what I do for a living to be in harmony. And it wasn't always like this. Sometimes I had to just get a paycheck, and we're going to talk a little bit about that, but it's definitely changed over the years. When I was younger and I was a young mother, there was a bit of survival mode. I like supply chain and I started in demand planning and S&OP, but it wasn't until I started challenging myself to look outside of planning to really see the breadth of supply chain and the people, and how up to 80% of those ESG impacts actually happen in the supply chain. So I wanted to raise my hand for a chance to positively influence the world. And I think that that's what's the most exciting thing, is that the future of supply chain, to me, it means that we are actually responsible for creating a world that's bearable and viable and equitable, where you have natural, industrial, human, and technological systems working together to forge a bold restorative path for all of us.
Great, thanks, Sheri. And just echoing on that point too, you know, within procurement, I really get inspired by the work in supplier diversity and in sustainability, which are some of the areas that I've gotten to touch during my leadership rotational program at GSK. And that keeps me excited to do some of the other tasks like contracting or negotiate pricing with suppliers, because you know that there is good in what we're doing and there's a mission in what we're doing. So and just on top of that, Sheri, too, you also champion you know, woman leadership development, and you have really been there for me as, you know, a mentor, a coach, someone to come to for sound advice. I remember coming to Sheri probably last year and asking her, which is full circle, you know, how were you able to build your professional brand? How do you become so successful with branding yourself as the supply chain queen? And I just love the fact that we're sitting in here now and talking about professional branding, how to make yourself more visible, how to, you know, build a brand for yourself where it's just not, you know, Lisa from GSK or Lisa who works for this X company with this title, but what do you stand for? What is your mission? And share that with your network. So our theme today is about professional branding, and honestly, couldn't think of anyone better to talk about this with. So like you mentioned before, we met at Rutgers, but I'm pretty sure you didn't even know who I was. I was just in the hallway and I saw you in the elevator and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's the supply chain queen, you know, this supply chain queen person I saw on LinkedIn, and there she is. And I think that was back in 2017. So honestly, I've always been really amazed by your confidence, your branding, and your consistency around all social platforms. It's very easy to make a post, but it's a lot harder to be consistent with your message and your branding. So first, how do you come up with a supply chain queen branding?
Yeah, so Lisa, it's interesting. I just want to say one thing because I'm just digesting your point you made. And I think that, you know, for social media, we all start on this path with professional branding for different reasons. And frankly, when I started, it was to stand out. And I'm going to get into how the brand actually started, but at some point it changed. And I began to find my own voice. And I was able to really evangelize my personal code of ethics and my values and how that relates to supply chain and sustainability and equity. And I think that that's that perfect Venn diagram where you do have that resonance and it all makes sense to people. And that's something that you can't fake. You know, when you authentically show up as yourself and you have something behind you, you're propelled by purpose, it shows up in how you meet the world every day. So the Supply Chain Queen brand, first of all, I do not have a marketing degree. I don't have a marketing background. I am a supply chain nerd. When I started, I literally had like 100 connections on LinkedIn. I didn't have a Twitter. I didn't have an Instagram. I didn't have Facebook. I didn't know what any of that was. And it was actually born out of rejection. Showing up at a recruiter's office, I was applying for an executive role, and I had been doing the work, but I was tucked in an organization supporting folks that didn't really give me credit, and I had enough. So, you know, I did what all of us do. For me, I took a picture from my wedding album and I cut out the head and I created a LinkedIn profile because I hadn't taken a professional picture in my entire life. Did the resume, 12-point font, showed up, resume in hand, and the recruiter, I'm talking and I'm describing my experience, and she just goes like this for like 5 minutes. And she's like, just stop. You're great, but I don't get any of this from your resume. And I realized as I'm kind of being nosy and like, you know, flipping through other resumes that I saw, I didn't stand out because for so long I thought that I had to fit in order to ascend and progress in my career. But once I realized that embracing what made me different was actually what needed to happen, that's how the Supply Chain Queen brand was formed. Literally out of rejection and out of someone who knew nothing about marketing, simply sharing a point of view. It could have been a picture, an article I read, forming my own thoughts. And it was small. It was like 3 times a week, but that's how it grew. It was consistency and it was authentically me, and pushing those boundaries, not only for the supply chain domain, but for myself.
Great, thanks, Sheri. So just to expand on that a little bit, I think that's a really interesting topic to kind of get into. So we have, I mean, for me as an early, a professional who's earlier in my career, there's this feeling that, like you said, I have to fit in. I have to be well-rounded. I have to do everything well. And my focus in the past couple of years have been, well, what are my weak points? What are the things that I can develop on? And I feel like, you know, it's to a certain extent we forget about what makes us so great, and what should, and we should actually focus our time on becoming even better at what we're already good at and what make us stand out. So that's a really interesting point that you brought up there.
Yeah, because it's not intuitive. I don't think it's intuitive that we would emphasize what makes us stand out and what makes us unique, and accentuate those differences in a very, I want to say a unique way, but I don't even think you have to overthink it. I think that being empowered and having a voice and being a part of the algorithms who underpin who you are is the number one thing that women specifically in supply chain need to be aware of. You have to be on social media. We've never had the access like we have right now with digital networks. I can pick up a book, any book, and Google someone or search for them on LinkedIn or Instagram, and within 10 minutes, I'm in their inbox having a conversation with them. Before, that was trapped in hierarchies in corporate America, and it's not like that anymore. So, I mean, I think we're going to talk a little bit about, you know, the nitty-gritty of professional branding and how to get started. But to your point, Lisa, you really have to embrace what makes you you. And that is a very individual commitment, and a commitment to personal growth that happens as you start on this professional branding journey.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. It has to do with being confident in yourself and be like, you know what, I am actually really good at this, and I should actually build on it, and just, you know, be more, give yourself more credit is what I would say, because I feel like we often don't do that. We don't give ourselves enough credit for the good things that we're doing. Instead, we focus on what can I do better? What am I doing that's not so great that I need to expand upon? And I think there's a balance between becoming well-rounded, because you do want to do things well generally, but you should also focus on what makes you tick and what you're passionate about and what other people will be fascinated by, when talking to you.
Absolutely.
So,
and pushing boundaries, you know, being provocative.
Yeah.
You mentioned confidence is important. I agree. I think it's also important to recognize, and I'm just going to say this out loud because I wish someone would have told me 10 or 15 years ago when I was starting my journey. We are all being judged in some way, shape, or form by another person who's nowhere close to having their stuff together. So you kind of have to like leave that at the door when you start. You're going to have trolls, you're going to have naysayers, and that's just part of it. But always focus on why. Why am I doing this? And for me, going back to that purpose as a North Star, it was the SDGs, it was my kids, it was wanting to make an impact. It was wanting for other folks in this domain to know, I see you, I hear you, you're possible. Those things matter. So that's kind of, once you find that, the rest is easy.
Awesome. Thanks, Sheri. So I guess next we'll go and get into more of the actual professional branding topic. So can you share some tips with our audience on how to start building their professional brands? What are some, basic things that they should start looking into?
Right. So the first thing is you have to open the account, which a lot of us, that's a struggle. So, I can always tell when folks are looking for a job because they clean up their LinkedIn profile. Maybe they post once or twice a month, and you see their activity, you see an increase in their activity. But think about who your target audience is. So maybe it's an employer, maybe it's others in your field, peers, maybe you just want to engage on certain topics and you need to find out what channels those folks are on and they actively engage. So LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram are the 3 channels that I really love. I'm hoping to get into YouTube, but that's a little bit more complicated with video. The other thing is you want to think about your unique value proposition. And I actually created a presentation to help guide my thoughts here, Elisa. So you want to be strategic and intentional. And that means think about who you want to be in 5 years. So everything you're doing right now is for 5 years from now. And the reason is that sometimes I find we limit ourselves. We box ourselves in. As ladies, I personally in my life, I've faced a lot of rejection. And I've also felt that I had to check every single box on a job application before I hit submit. And that's just not the case. So when you think of yourself and you envision who am I in 5 years, and work toward that person, you'd be surprised. It's a real headspace change. Mm-hmm. The other thing you want to think about is, what's your promise? So what are the themes that you're most passionate about? What are the topics that you write about, that you evangelize, that really move you and that you have a unique point of view? You also want to be positive. So this is something, and I've gone back and forth with other B2B influencers about. People typically don't like a Debbie Downer. Like being positive, you can be authentic and have a divergent point of view, but you typically want to stay, this is a professional brand. And also I think the other thing is being artifactual. So what images would you associate with who you want to be and the topics that you're evangelizing? And that's also really important when you think about beginning the process of social sharing online. I could go on, dear. The first step, open the account, be clear on who you are, be clear on what you talk about. You have to have a professional picture. You don't have to have a snazzy brand name, but you have to be consistent and you have to show up as that person every day.
Yeah, and I think it makes it easier when you're talking about something that you're passionate about. Because if you're, for example, if you're passionate about sustainability, you can talk about sustainability all day, and all you have to do is to translate that into your LinkedIn post or articles or what you're sharing, and it becomes very organic. It's actually what you already like doing. So to your first point, Sheri, about planning for 5 years, I think that's kind of similar to advice when they say dress for the job that you want. Dress for the job that you want to have in 5 years, and you kind of start acting like like you're in that role already, and you're setting yourself up for success. So in 2016, 2017, what did Sheri at that time had envisioned in her mind, and has all of that come true for you?
Okay, I'm giving away my secret sauce, but that's okay. So professional branding for me was a prerequisite in career pathing. So I wanted to obtain more strategic roles and build relationships that maybe I didn't have because I had been basically stuck in a hierarchy for a really long time. And there's actually, when you think about what is professional branding, I found a couple definitions that I really like and that I used back in 2016 that compare professional branding to a profitable form of investment of time, labor, and relationships that are essential in a reputation economy. And if you think about the premise that we are in a transition toward a purpose economy where people value sustainability and sustainable ways of working, and they lead with their values, this is what makes professional branding so important, because when you're trying to build relationships and trust on digital networks, like a lot of folks have had to lean on in the past 18 months because of COVID, people have a sense of who you are before you even show up. They pretty much know what makes you tick. And when you think about this process of creating, positioning, and maintaining an impression of yourself online, it's actually a unique mix of very specific characteristics that make you you, that signal a promise to your target audience. So every interaction online, every post, all of that exists in harmony with your brand promise. And I think that that's also, it goes back to your question before this, getting really clear on who you are and what you stand for. That is important, because you don't want a branding failure.
Great. Thanks, Sheri. And so what impact has your professional brand made on your career progression, as you mentioned that it's a tool for career pathing?
Yeah, so I mean, it obviously has translated into a lot of really great opportunities. I have been able to several X my salary.
Yeah.
It's taken me, I've zigged and zagged a bit. So I started doing it for a living. So in terms of influencer marketing, also hosting events, doing independent analyst work, like all of that happened as a result of the professional branding. Definitely helped income. It helped me find who I was and what I valued most in the world, which was it's been a magnificent opportunity, actually. I've met tons of people. I've also mentored and helped tons of people. And I knew I was on the right path based on not only the reach, but the thousands of messages, a lot of them from young women and folks who are underrepresented in STEM and supply chain, who just, I mean, I keep all of them, by the way. It's just unbelievable. It's unbelievably touching, especially considering that I do have a non-traditional career path too. And I didn't see this as a career path for myself. Neither one of my parents went to college. I grew up poor. I didn't think that this would be my life back then. And I don't know if you can, you have to be able to visualize certain things and see other people. And I just didn't have that in my life. So getting those messages, and for folks to say, you inspire me to push harder, you inspire me to challenge, and you inspire me to be a rebel. So that's the most impactful thing, is the supply chain revolution was born out of this professional branding, the podcast, the community, and rebels are necessary. They're beautiful, and they're considered architects of change in challenging that status quo. And it's not until we look through a rear view mirror that we appreciate the value of rebels. A lot of times they're called disruptors or innovators. But I think that that's probably the third most powerful thing that's come out of this, is that there are so many people that raise their hand and say, I challenge conventional thinking. I challenge the status quo and the way that we hire, the way that we lead, the way that we promote, and what we define as a supply chain professional in 2021.
Awesome. Thanks, Sheri. Yeah, I mean, you have definitely inspired me to raise my hand and to challenge and to see where or how we could do better for the community, for the organization that we're in, and just think creatively and just actually believe that, my voice matters, that, if I just raise my hand and if I just raise my voice, is equally as important as anyone else in the organization. I just have to put my plan to action. So I definitely have been inspired by you within the past couple of years of knowing you, and I'm really glad that we're here today. So expanding on that, outside of professional branding, In celebrating that is International Women's Day and the National Women's History Month in March. So what did you choose to challenge this year, and why do you think it's important for women and advocates to challenge?
It's so important to challenge. So there's a picture, I think I shared it like maybe a week or two ago, and it's a young woman sitting in a chair, poised, ponytail, and her hands are on her knees, and she's sitting in front of a very large panel of men who look the same. And the caption reads, "Explain to me what you bring to this company." And how many people listening right now have ever felt like that? Yeah. For most of my career, I've been the only woman in the room. And I probably have been the youngest person in the room for a large majority of my career. And I think that the one piece of advice, and maybe this would have been different, like, 5-7 years ago.
Yeah.
But now it's know your worth. And you have to challenge when it comes to your worth. And that the right place will value you the right way. And you'll feel appreciated. And you'll know when it's the right place. But never settle. And never stay in a situation or with an employer who doesn't see your value. And a lot of that comes from you challenging. And if I can share, so part of the catalyst that kind of started me down this professional branding journey, I was in a situation with an employer where I was doing the work, but I didn't have the title. And I found out that I was actually being underpaid. So a male counterpart was making more than me for doing the same job. And I challenged. It was uncomfortable. And I remember that moment very clearly in my mind right now. I'm getting goosebumps just talking about it, because that was really the first time that I stood up, and it was scary, and I didn't know what was going to happen afterwards. And it worked out. But in going through that, it was interesting because I got the money. I didn't get the title, but I said to myself, why should I even have to fight? Why should I have to explain the value I add to this company? And I already knew that there were inequities in pay. So I decided to, look elsewhere. And it was that decision that changed the course of my career, coupled with a few other things: continuous learning, pushing myself. I have 2 master's degrees, 5 certifications. All of that happened in that period. But you have to own it. You have to know your worth, and it has to also, what you do outside of your work. So outside of 9 to 5, are you actually improving yourself? Is that aligning with the things that you post on social media? And I think that that's one thing: know your worth, choose to challenge, but also, like, you have to be consistent. It starts with us. It's not anyone's job to make us successful or happy. Not our employers, not our husband, not our family, not our friends. It's our job. We choose every morning when we wake up the life that we want. So I think knowing your worth, you challenge people around you, but you also have to challenge yourself and be accountable for your actions every day.
Great. Thanks for sharing that, Sheri. I mean, that, what you just shared about knowing your worth just really touched me on a whole other personal level. I mean, I have a best friend who is, underpaid. She's not in supply chain, but she's underpaid severely compared to her peers. And she knows this. And every 2 weeks, I'm like yelling at her. I'm like, go in there and ask them to pay you what you're worth for the work that you are doing. And she just has so much anxiety around it. Like, what if they fire me? I can't afford to lose this job. What if they replace me with someone else? I need to find another option first. I need to get another role before I go in there, and maybe they'll counter and want to keep me and pay me, what I'm worth. And my question to her was, well, if a company doesn't value you currently for the job that you are doing, to where you're so afraid of going in there and just asking, the worst that can happen is a no, right? But just for asking, if you're that you feel that undervalued within this organization, is this the right place for you to be working at when you feel like you have to settle, knowing that you're worth much more than this? So this just really, I definitely will be sharing, this podcast with her, and hopefully it will encourage her to just go in there and just ask for what she's worth.
100%. You know what else, Lisa?
Lisa?
I find that once you start the journey of professional branding, you are not defining your worth or your value based on how your employer values you. And what I mean is the title that you have in your company or the amount of money you make. And that's another critical value lever in professional branding, owning that. You own how the world sees you. So in your company, all of us are tucked in a hierarchy somewhere, but think about when you show up and the power of defining who you are. The Supply Chain Queen brand, when you go on LinkedIn, for example, I write that story, not any employer. I write that, I own that. It's very empowering. And I think it's also, we would be remiss without just highlighting here that as women, oftentimes we do not do a good job of being a champion for the good work we do. For many, many years, I was doing amazing things and I never, ever talked about it. Now, male counterparts did talk about it. It was attaboy, and all of the accolades and all of the things that happened as a result of being an evangelist for the good work that you do. That's the other thing. You can use social media to sort of shape that narrative, and also position yourself for promotion, position yourself for other jobs, for targeted employers, if that's what you're using professional branding for and career pathing.
Great, thanks, Sheri. So I think I'm out of questions for today. It was really great getting your insight. But so just to recap, Sheri's advice is open an account, choose the social media platform that you want to engage in, whether it's LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and plan for 5 years. Where do you want to be in 5 years? How do you see yourself, and work towards that goal? It makes it easier. Find what takes you, what you're passionate about, and leveraging what you're passionate about to be your brand, and also be positive. Did I get that right, Sheri?
And be consistent. You
Yes,
have to
that
show
too.
up on a very regular basis. There are other things like the nitty-gritty of hashing, making sure that you use the right hash strategy, making sure that the content is relevant, making sure that you engage with your posts. And I think we might have some questions around that if folks want to get into that level of detail. But it works.
Yeah, so we'll move to, clearly, as we have seen with your record, Sheri, it clearly does work. Sheri even got to me about, I think you made a post the other day and you were like, you know what? I'm waiting for my tool to tell me what time is the best time to post. And I was like, Sheri, I didn't even know that was a thing, that you can time your post to where it will encourage the most engagement. So those are some of the really cool tools and tips and tricks to think about when, building a professional brand. So next we'll go into the audience questions. We have 2 questions that were submitted prior to the session, and then I will go into the live Q&A. So the first question is, how do you become a guest speaker for podcasts and webinars, even though you do not have years of industry experience or an extensive amount of credentials?
Raise your hand and ask. This is something that it's sort of a pet peeve. So I work at IBM right now, and there are 2 women who are on my team, and they're younger and they're phenomenal. I want to work for them one day. I'm just throwing that out there. And it's interesting because one gal in particular, she said to me one time that she didn't feel like she had enough experience, and that somehow years experience translated into credibility. And I think that's the biggest fallacy. what you'll find is that there are people that have 30 years experience, but they've just been repeating that year of experience 30 times. And at some point, you're going to have a moment either where you ask someone to be a door opener or you are that door opener. So I think you have to raise your hand and ask, and you also have to put out the word. So start professional branding. I mean, that's one way to get your name out there and start building traction around the topics that you're most passionate about. And it's interesting because when I've done some corporate training on professional branding and this comes up, I equate this to, how do you find love? And I was divorced, so I can share this story. People say, well, how do I find my soulmate? And how do I, fall in love and find love? And the answer is you have to be love. And that when you show up as your whole self, the universe responds in kind. And I think that it's the same analogy for professional branding and wanting to have eminence and be a person who people think of when they say supply chain. They think of you as a thought leader. You have to be that, which means you have to show up and be consistent.
And be authentic in who you are, because 100%. It shows if it's not, right?
Yes.
And, just for me, if I may add into it, that's actually, this question speaks to me because I've actually been trying to take as many speaking opportunities as possible, engaging in external professional organizations like ISM New Jersey. So like you mentioned, Sheri, just raise your hand, volunteer, be in uncomfortable situations that you have never been in before. And that's the only way that you will be able to grow, that you'll be able to get better, because I used to have a crazy fear of public speaking. If I'm speaking in front of a class, my entire body would just like burst into flame. So I still get a little bit of a butterflies, but I feel like with all of the practices I've been getting, it's been getting a lot better. And just by volunteering, asking for opportunities. Hey, I'm helping out with planning this virtual conference or this conference. Can I get a 2 minutes to speak about or to introduce the session or to speak about the topic? And that's a great way for you to get involved and start to get some visibility and connect and network and potentially get into future podcasts and webinars, even if you're still early in your career like I am. I just graduated from Rutgers undergrad, not probably 3 years ago, back in 2018. So I've been trying to do a lot to build, my professional branding as well as just confidence overall. Because I do think that it takes a lot of confidence in yourself to be able to put yourself out there, and it gets really uncomfortable. But through getting the right coaching, the right mentor, getting insight, bouncing ideas off someone like Sheri, it has been really, really, really helpful in my career, especially early on.
Amazing.
And the next,
I want to give a shout out to Sophia. Hi, Sophia. Hi, Aaron, Mohammed, Pelume, Christine. Hi, Christine from Germany, and Keys. So Keys says he's the supply chain king, but I've trademarked the king, the queen, the prince, the princess, but I love you, Keys. Hello, I see him in the chat. It's very late for him.
Awesome. Hello, everyone. And so the next question is, how do you get people to be engaged in your post, Sheri?
So it's interesting because now you're getting into like, depending on the platform, like the timing matters. So the algorithm will naturally, you want to boost visibility in the algorithm in your news feed and in your network's feed. So getting visibility, the number one way to get visibility is add value and post things that are relevant and that resonate with your target audience. So this could be folks in your network or the hash that you're using. And also, I think the other thing is you can't just post something and then just let it lay flat. I like to think of social media as dynamic IP, which is very different. You have to, it's like growing something, there's a certain amount of care and stewardship that's required when you're sharing a dynamic point of view, which means you have to comment, you have to like, you have to be responsive. And on LinkedIn, that's typically within a 30-minute to 90-minute time frame. Your algorithm will be sort of upvoted in a way based on the number of folks that respond and how many likes and celebrates. Those are typically, I would say celebrate is the best way to increase engagement. And that means that the visibility of your post is amplified. Always comment. If you share someone else's post, commenting is the best way to get visibility on LinkedIn. But the short answer is you have to post something that people actually want to read and engage with. And I don't mean to be oh, I see the comments now. Yeah, I don't mean to be, kind of flippant, but it's the truth. If you're posting things that are valuable, all of that comes. Just don't focus on the outcome. You want to focus on the process. And this is coming from a supply chain nerd. The magic that you're looking for is in the process. It will happen. It's just like SNOP and IBP. Focus on the process, get really clear. The outcomes will happen.
Great, thanks, Sheri. Now we'll move into the live Q&A. So the first question we have is from Mohammed Sher Ali. The question is, what inspired you, Sheri, to join the field of supply chain management field? So I think you answered that question earlier in the episode. Do you have any other point that you would like to add?
I just think supply chains are the conduit that really connect a lot of disparate processes and also the framework for how ESG prosperity happens. So when you think about a world where, there's no hunger, where no one's left behind, a world without poverty, a world where everyone has access to jobs and education and clean water and clean energy and all of the things that we would hope our world becomes, supply chains are the great connector. Again, if you asked me when I was younger what a supply chain was, I wouldn't have an answer. I don't have anyone in my family that works in a supply chain. Despite the fact that 37% of the world actually works in a supply chain, I wasn't born in that family. But what I love so much about supply chain is also the breadth, the different occupations where you can explore. And if you're curious about something, how that can lead you into an entirely different life and the impact that you can have in supply chain. That's what excites me the most.
Thanks, Sheri. That's precisely the reason why I picked supply chain management as my major at Rutgers when I joined. I was like, wow, there are so many things that I can do with this degree. It covers so many different functions and so many parts of the supply chain that I can work in. But I actually it's actually interesting now that I think about it, back in 2017 and 2018, most people didn't know what supply chain was. And I kind of had to think of a simplistic way to kind of narrow down the definition to my family and friends. Like, what are you getting a degree for again?
Yeah, I think COVID has changed that. So the toilet paper crisis, that was sort of the first. Yeah, and it's funny because Biden, this was a few weeks ago, Biden made an announcement around building more resilient supply chains. And it's funny because my father called me and he's kind of old school and he's like, I always told you to get in the government. Now you see, the government's valuing supply chains. You still have a chance.
That is too funny. So next question, we'll move to the next one from Sophia. So how can one recover from a branding failure, or rather, how can we prevent it from happening?
Oh,
that's a really good one.
Yeah, I knew someone was going to ask about a branding failure. So this is how I would define a branding failure. It's the inability to create a positive desired image in the minds of your target audience. So that means there's a mismatch between the goal and the perception of whatever you're posting. And a lot of branding failures can include insufficient branding. So that this means lack of content, failure to emphasize the desired message, but also misdirected branding. So you have some inconsistencies with your brand identity, or you are addressing the wrong audience. And when a branding failure happens, the internet lives forever. If you delete, you can delete the post. If you have trolls, and all of us will, especially once you get going, unless people are, you're going to meet those people. I certainly have on LinkedIn. I think initially when it happens, it can be really shocking because you're like, I don't even know this person and they're mean, really mean. It's important for you to kind of let it develop. And show that you are open to divergence. If someone, but I do want to say that if someone is just being plain rude, I block. And you'll know the difference when it happens. You'll feel the difference. You'll feel the difference between someone challenging you in a professional way and someone just being a jerk. If you create a branding failure, it happens. If you can delete it, move on. And if not, it's all part of the journey. Just take it in, learn from it, and keep going. Don't let it stop you. Does that help,
Great.
Sophia? Amen. Yes. Okay.
Just keep swimming, right? Like
just keep swimming. Yeah, just keep swimming.
Yeah. Our next question is from Oluwapalumi. I'm sorry if I'm not saying your name correctly, but the question is, so what specific advice can you give me as a lawyer who intends to make a career switch to supply chain management? I'm a resident in Lagos, Nigeria, and I'm overwhelmed and navigating hasn't been smooth.
So there's a lot of opportunity in contract management in supply chain. So you're in the right place. I'm unclear exactly. Are you looking for a specific field? Sourcing and procurement would be a great pivot. Also, there's a lot around compliance, trade compliance. I'm not a lawyer, but at one point I wanted to be a lawyer. Earlier in my life, I think that skill specifically is very niche. If you wanted to get into supply chain technology, that's also an IP. I don't know what type of law you're in right now, but there's so much opportunity in the marriage of the legal field and supply chain right now. Sourcing and procurement, that's my answer.
Great. Next question is from Jacqueline. Her question is, what would you recommend for young professionals just entering the logistic industry or currently still studying that you wish you knew during that stage in your life?
Logistics. There's a lot of opportunity in last mile, I think, in shaping the customer experience. There's been a recent uptick in omni-channel commerce, and the retail supply chain is getting a lot of attention. I think that marriage of technology and logistics shaping the customer experience is super, super cool. I think also thinking about different ways how we serve our customers. So maybe we redesign supply chains in a cool way, where we have shorter supply chains, and we think about the environmental impact of every lane and node and move and transaction from, the upstream supplier all the way to the customer, and really connecting that first mile and that last mile. I think that that's the future of a logistics professional in this space.
Great. And then another question is also from Muhammad is, I would like to ask from both of you great panelists, what actions are you taking? Well, thank you. And what actions are you taking for green and CO2 reductions in supply chain processes?
That's a huge question. You go first, Lisa.
So that is a very loaded question. So actually, for one of the projects that I've worked on previously, we've looked at the environmental impact on a manufacturing process of a bioprocessed material that we were purchasing. So one of the major issues that I've discovered, not really issue, but a concern, is the plastic waste. This material specifically uses a lot of plastic because it's in the pharma manufacturing process. It can't be recycled. And then to that point, what can we do about it? What can we leverage new technologies that would either eliminate or reduce the plastic use that we have seen with this material that we're currently using? And luckily for us, organizationally, it has been very, very supported to look into sustainability initiatives and to go green and to find ways where we can make better impact environmentally. So that is one of the ways for me that you can look into your supply chain and find efficiency. Something else that I'm thinking about, within my role in e-com is packaging, right? So to be more green, are we shipping logistically? Are we shipping our products to our consumers that is the least wasteful? So that's something. Are we shipping with extra plastic bags that do not need to be in the packaging? Are we shipping in multiple carton containers? Can we simplify and our packaging to where we only need to have the original packaging of the product or just one layer of packaging around it? So that the item can be shipped without damage. So minimizing the amount of carton, plastic, extra materials, extra waste that we do not need is something that consumers today care more and more about. Because if you're like me, I spend most of my money on Amazon and I get a package every day, and then it piles up that I have 20 different boxes. So as a consumer and as a supply chain, how can we minimize it? How can we reduce the waste? So that's something to think about.
Those are all great suggestions. So I would start with, I'll take a different approach here. I'll start with education and awareness. I think that a lot of folks don't really understand the impact of what they do at the individual level and then how they show up at work, and that influences the decisions that they make as a supply chain professional. I'm just going to throw that out there. The other thing is, addressing waste, some of those classic supply chain levers that we know. I think the transition to renewable energy, overall enhancing systemic efficiency. So, the tension in agriculture is front of mind for me right now with some of the work that I'm doing at IBM. And there is a tension between land use and the field and the forest. And I believe in regenerative agriculture and protecting our ecosystems. I think that when we continue to degrade land, what we're going to see in the future, we hear a lot about in the circular economy, the concept of cradle to cradle, but we're really going to start to think about things in a different way, soil to soil, because the climate emergency right now is the #1 threat facing our survival. And part of that means that we have to start shifting our agricultural practices, and we have to start protecting the land and the oceans in ways that we can do right now in our own personal lives, like stop eating beef, maybe reduce your consumption of dairy. All of those things would have such a meaningful impact in the world that we share. The other thing, the shift in transportation to electric vehicles, green buildings, and making sure that, again, it's going back to energy, which I mentioned in the beginning, addressing refrigeration. Like, that's also a huge benefit right now that you can leverage in supply chains, which means we're going to make them shorter. We're going to think about hyper-localism. We're going to think about how we source things. We're going to think about a lot of concepts where we've designed these massive networks that are ineffective because we were always driving to lowest price. But the price of defecting and the price of carbon is externalized in these networks. So I think once we understand the true cost of carbon, the social cost of carbon, the supply chains of the future are going to look very different.
Awesome. Thanks,
answer the question?
Sheri. Yeah, very good question. And then we have one more question in the Q&A. So how do we in supply chain move the needle for a more sustainable world where stakeholders may value the bottom line over ethical operations? And do you have any advice for how to improve confidence / the imposter syndrome?
Okay, so I know we only have a
There's
couple
two
minutes.
questions.
The imposter syndrome is something that a lot of people struggle with. I think that you have to get started, and I think I said this earlier, everyone's being judged by someone who does not have their stuff together, and that is a fact. The best business case and the best positive reinforcement that you need is by starting and being consistent, and it will happen on its own. Christine, I see your question. When I started, I invested I invested a lot more time than I do now. It's okay, dear. Yeah, at first, because I was sort of finding my footing, probably an hour a day. And I since have had to set some guardrails to make sure that I have balanced time with my family. I was always on social media in the beginning, and I realized as my kids got older, I was younger when I started breastfeeding, kids were all crawling on the floor, but now they are looking at me to be present. So I would recommend setting an amount of time a day that you can actually commit to and deliver. 30 minutes is a good starting point. And also make sure that you have balance in your life. So you don't want to constantly be connected to your phone, and you don't want to become addicted to social media. I think that COVID has shown us all that mental health is very, very important, and unplugging is equally important.
Great. So I think that's all of the time that we have left. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining this episode. It was certainly great to talk to you, Sheri, and to learn more about you and how you've been able to build your professional brand. And I hope everyone have gotten some good tips and some insight from today's session.
Thank you, everyone, for joining. I wish I was more coordinated and I could talk and type at the same time.
Same here. I'm trying to toggle between the Q&A and talking to you. So thanks so much, everyone, for joining. I'm really glad, to have all of you on the line. And the episode will also be recorded if you like to watch it back later.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Have a great
Thank
day.
you.
Reach out on social media if you have a question. I see some folks here that I recognize. Okay, awesome.
Right. Bye,
Thanks,
everyone.
Lisa.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks, Lisa and Sheri.
Bye, Kathy.
You rocked it.